We're picking up with, I don't know the number of the question, but it's, what was Lucifer like before his sin?
22.
Question number 22. Where in the world or in the Bible would you go to describe what Satan was like before he was called Satan?
The verses that talk about him walking on the fire stones, I think it was, and the jewels that rent him, and he shone.
So what are those references?
I don't know. I'm studying it.
Well, there's only two major ones.
Well, Ezekiel and Isaiah. I got Isaiah in front of me, and it's not here. Ezekiel 27. Ezekiel what?
Okay, let's go to Ezekiel. Now I'd like you to make observations. This is what you want to do. This is what you call practice for exegesis next year. You have to learn to be able to make as many observations from a series of statements as possible. What could you tell me about Satan from verse 12? One thing.
Whoa. Very wise. Very beautiful.
Okay, seal us up the sum of wisdom and perfect in beauty. So,
Intelligent.
right, exemplary in wisdom and beauty. The fact that God would say this to Satan and not to other angels tells us what? So, yeah, if Lucifer was the sum and perfect in beauty, that implies that either all the angels were like that, or he is unique among the angels, the highest. What else could we learn about Lucifer from that verse?
Why does it say, thou sealest up the sun's feet? Who's thou?
Well, that's another observation. What's the significance of that? I'll turn it around and ask you. Who's speaking?
God's speaking.
So what does that tell you?
Satan.
So what does that tell you about the relationship between Lucifer and God at that time? Okay, a simple point is that Lucifer was in such a position at that point in time that he was on intimate terms with God. He wasn't just an angel in a far-flung domain, but he was an intimate relationship with God. But there's still another observation from the verse.
Well, it says that he's actually the king of Tyre.
Okay, I believe that this teaches that that Satan himself, the formerly unfallen cherub that covered the throne of God, was actually the power behind the earthly king of Tyre subsequent to Satan's fall. Because, well, this is Ezekiel lived, in Jeremiah's time. This is about 600 BC, during just about the time of the captivity. Well, Ezekiel was a captive, all right? And so this revelation is being made through the prophet Ezekiel about an earthly king that was then in existence, or shortly in existence after that. And it tells us that this king, it implies that Satan, described in his pre-fallen state, was the one that was behind this human king. It doesn't describe him in his fallen state here, but that's coming in the passage.
Yeah. So that's why I don't see the connection.
So all we're saying is that
we're spanning 2 periods of time.
No, the description of Satan begins in his unfallen state, but as we go through the passage, he'll bring it up to time. He goes from his unfallen state into time and describes what he's like now, but it implies that he's behind this earthly king in time.
Right, but I wouldn't take you then to say that he was in an unfallen state when he was behind the king.
Oh no. This is simply a general description of this spirit being. Okay, verse 13. What else do we discover from the passage about Lucifer?
He was in the Garden of Eden.
Yes. What else?
Oh, man, this guy was walking jewelry box. Does that mean like a clothing, a garment?
I have no idea whether these are to be taken literally or symbolic of his coloring, his clothing, or whatever. My own feelings is that that they are representative. Yeah, well, but when he was in Eden, what form did he take? Serpents, and we know that serpents, for example, and many of them have beautiful coloring, and they look like rocks, the colors of rocks. You could, like a mosaic, a mosaic is made out of rock. Okay, now you can just take that or leave that, whatever you want, but that would be my explanation for that these stones are actually symbolic of or representative of the colors that he had as created. When he manifested himself, he was beautiful. At the end of the verse, it adds something else. Yeah, the workmanship of thy timbrels and of thy flutes was prepared in thee in the day that thou wast created. Timbrels and flutes are musical instruments.
Prepared in thee.
Yeah. So that seems to imply that he was created with the capacity to make music. That's right.
Built in.
Yeah, the Hebrew there is. I remember translating that one time, and I'm still left in confusion about it. I forget now exactly what it was. But it's hard to tell exactly what is being said here, except that he had some kind of relationship with music, or the built-in capacity to control or
that could
use.
Show that he has a great understanding of music, and that's why we have the influence that music has.
I believe that.
Sphere situation.
If he was created as the next verse tells us to be over the throne of God, we know from Revelation and other places that there is constant praise and worship around the throne of God, and so that was his intended function, to help produce that. But in his fallen state, he's used it to rebel against God and to try to deceive and carry out his own anti-God purposes. Anyway, this is what he was like prior to his fall. Created with the capacity to make music. The next verse, what is it? Well, it also tells us one more thing. We've already noted about him already in verse 13. Created. So he's not infinite. He is finite. He's not eternal. He's limited to time. He's not, just because that one word, or those two words, was created, it tells us an awful lot about him. He's not as big as God. He's not as powerful as God. He's not as, he hasn't always existed in opposition to God. So that destroys these Eastern philosophies about eternal good versus eternal evil. All right. Verse 14, what else does it tell us about him? Okay. In the day that he was created, he was the anointed cherub. Today, he's not the anointed cherub any longer. He's a fallen cherub. But he was anointed at the time. And he is described as and classified as one of the cherubim, not a seraphim.
He was given his position. He was set up by God, set up in a position.
Right?
So he didn't obtain his own high standing. He was given even the glory that he did have.
Right. He was given a created place, right? And it describes where that place was. Okay, mountain is very frequently in Scripture descriptive or symbolic of kingdom. And so what it's probably saying is that that he had access to the very holy kingdom of God, that he was an important place there. Thou hast walked up and down in the midst of the stones of fire. Well, again, if you go to the visions that John saw in the book of Revelation, the throne of God is a place where there's fire and thundering and lightnings come out of, right? And stones all through history have always been used as foundational to the buildings of things, right? So that would be representative of the location of the very throne of God. So he had access to the throne of God then. What does verse 15 say?
He was perfect in
Right. He was not created imperfect, he was created perfect. But he was created with the capacity to sin. He had the ability. That's an important description about Satan's original status. We could add to this the statements in Isaiah, the fact that Satan had the ability to reason contrary to God, because we know that he did. He said, I will be like, I will ascend, I will do this and that. Shows us that he exercised his mind and his own will in opposition to God. So he must have been created with that capacity. Okay, so I think we've covered the major things here. Let's move on to the next question. Where is he? Has he been cast out from heaven? To answer this question, we have to depend basically on what little information we are given about what people have said about him, and what the scripture writers have acknowledged where they did see him. Where is he described as having been?
Well, one thing we can say, he has been in the Garden of Eden.
He was in Eden.
He was in heaven, throne. And getting to the point of...
Okay, now we're assuming that this is post-fall. Where is he today, and has he been cast from heaven?
Okay, but I mean, even that's where he was. He was post-fall. With fall, he ended up in the Garden of Eden. But I'm referring to in heaven as with the sons of God in regards to Job. And,
okay, so it appears as if he still has access to heaven. Now, why would that be questioned? We know, at least in the Old Testament, in Job 1 and 2, that that he did have.
I don't know enough of the Bible to say one way or the other, but I do know that he'd be cast down. Now, I don't know if that took place, considering some of the things Jesus said when he was on earth, whether that took place at the time Jesus was on earth, or if that's still part of what.
We'll be discussing that today when we get to the judgments. It comes up here, though. I mean, where is he? If he's been cast out of heaven to the earth, or
that he's on earth, but he has. If we still base in the Old Testament, then he has access from earth to heaven.
What are his titles in the New Testament? Where do we see Satan active in the New Testament?
We have seen him active in the New Testament in regards to Jesus.
Okay, where was he? Okay, he tempted Christ in Palestine. Okay, he took him into the wilderness. He took him to the temple. He took him up on the mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the earth. That he would be able to do that has been taken by Schofield and other people to mean that he had some miraculous ability to show to Christ in some chronological way all the kingdoms that he would ever have control over in this world, not just the then and present ones. Now there's some debate over that, but that's the idea. So
he entered into human body. Judas Iscariot.
okay, so he has possessed individuals. Judas. Who else? Who are the Old Testament examples? Come on, what are the examples in the Old Testament? How about the king of Tyre? Just talking about it. Now I let the cat out of the bag. What's the other Old Testament example? It wasn't the king of Tyre over in Isaiah. Which one was he controlling at that point? That Isaiah 14 reference talks about a judgment on Satan, but it was in the midst of a whole section from about 4 or 5 chapters on what king? No. Close. It's right there at the beginning of the chapter, or partway down. King of Babylon. Well, yeah, but they're generally finished. Okay.
Wilderness temple about him.
Did you read my scratches? We know that Satan, if he did not possess Peter, at least hung around him. Okay, so he personally attacked Peter. Satan has desired to sift you, and he motivated Peter to deny Christ. This kind of goes along with 2 Peter 5:8, or is it 1 Peter 5:8? It has to be 1 Peter 5:8. 1 Peter has 5 chapters, and 2 Peter has 3. 1 Peter 5:8, watch out, for the devil goes about like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. Where does he go about seeking whom he may devour? What's the locus of his attack today? Not Mars, it's Earth. Okay?
Well, we
So,
can't say for sure.
so he focuses his energies versus believers on earth. Right? That's 1 Peter 5:8. Okay? The fact that that he does have access to heaven, that he does have access to earth, doesn't actually solve the question of whether or not Satan has been cast out of heaven or not.
That's a fairly big question.
Yeah. In my own mind, I believe that the evidence is there that Satan is still in heaven or has access to heavenly realms, whether or not it's the actual throne of God. But in the future, he will be literally cast down to the earth and limited.
After the rapture.
Yeah,
Or at the time of the rapture.
during the tribulation.
Well, you don't think he's in heaven, I mean in hell now because it's reserved for the devil.
That's right.
So not,
Well, see, there's a mess up in his name hell anyway. Show.
Now, you need to pay attention to the wording of these Old Testament passages. In the Ezekiel 28 passage, verse 16, it says, "Therefore I will cast thee as profane out of the mountain of God, and I will destroy thee, O covering cherub, from the midst of the throne of fire. I will lay thee before kings, that they may behold thee. Therefore I will bring forth a fire from the midst of thee, it shall devour thee, I will bring thee to ashes upon the earth. All they that know thee among the people shall be appalled at thee." That's Ezekiel 28, so it's predicting it. Okay? If you go to Isaiah 14, the language is a little different. Verse 4 says that thou shalt take up this proverb against the king of Babylon and say, "How has the oppressed ceased? The Lord has broken the staff of the wicked. He who smote the people in wrath is persecuted, and none hinders." Now this could be describing merely the king of Babylon, the fact that either he has already been judged, or God sees a future event as so certain that it is as if it is done already in time. That's what you call a futuristic present in Greek. See, like what you realize, like what you guys are taking in Greek is you're taking future tenses and present tenses and the past tenses. You have to realize there's a whole broad range of meaning the way those tenses can be used in function, like in context. Most of the book of Revelation is in the imperfect or aorist tense, but it has never happened. It's all yet future. It's visions that John saw in the past, and so he described it in past terms because this is what I saw. This happened, and then this happened, and then this happened, but they are visions of future events. Now that could be the significance of the language here in Isaiah 14 where it says, "How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer?" Is Isaiah being given a vision of a future event and describing it? See? So sometimes the verb tenses don't solve problems for you.
But Babylon was destroyed.
Certainly.
If we're referring to the actual country Babylon and not the generalized name for the kingdom.
Okay. So that's something to bear in mind. Revelation chapter 12, verses 7 to 10, we have a description by John of that event, that war between Michael and the devil and their angels during the tribulation period. That's Revelation 12, verses 7 to 10. And at the conclusion of that battle, then the devil's power will be broken and he will be limited to the earth. It says in verse 9, the great dragon was cast out, that old serpent. Well, let me start with verse 8. The devil prevailed not, neither was their place found any more in heaven. And the great dragon was cast out, that old serpent called the devil and Satan, who deceives the whole world. He was cast out into the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. And I heard a loud voice saying, in heaven now is come salvation and strength, the kingdom of our God, the power of his Christ. For the accuser of our brethren is cast down, who accused them before our God day and night. Presently. Verse 13.
Confused before God without being in heaven. Because God is all knowing.
Yeah, I've always envisioned it as if he actually personally went there. You know, maybe. Yes. Verse 13, then, at the conclusion of this event, when the dragon saw that he was cast unto the earth, he persecuted the woman who brought forth the male child. And so there's chapter 13, where you have the climax of satanic power in the earth, and everybody has to have the mark of the beast and all this. Okay, it's really going to get bad when Satan is limited to work his wonders and his opposition to the earth. What is he called? What are his titles today? This kind of has a bearing on this as well. There are some types that are geographic in nature. That is called the God of this age.
So you know what we did the other day?
Yes, I know, but there are a couple of it that make implications about his locus, his location. Like he's called the God of this age. That doesn't solve it, but what else is he called in Ephesians 2? The prince of the power of the air, the spirit that now works in the children of disobedience. And then you take those references in Ephesians 2:2 and 6:12, 11 and 12, where it says, we, believers, wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers and spiritual wickedness in heavenly places. So it seems to me that the devil, if he doesn't have direct access to the throne of God today, which I wouldn't necessarily disagree with, but if he is cast out of the very presence of God, at least he is able to work in space. You know, but he certainly uses his general power and accessibility to work, to focus his efforts down here. Okay. What was the next question?
What was Lucifer say?
I think we already touched on that. Let's leave that and go on to the next one. What difference is there, if any, in the revelation of Satan in the Old Testament as compared to that in the New? Any difference between the revelations in Old and New Testaments?
Basically, I could be on a limb saying this, but basically the judgment that he's going to do is more described in the New Testament. Not the song that is already predicted.
Yes, I believe that that's the main point between the difference between the Old and New Testament revelations about Satan and his activities is that the Old Testament gives us the basics. It describes it. It opens with his deceptive opposition to God. He is named a few times. He causes kings to disobey God. He stands in opposition to God's hand-picked individuals. He seeks to destroy the righteous, accuses them before God. But if you want to know the practical details about Satanology, then the New Testament fills in the gaps. It's the New Testament that tells us what he is now doing today. It is the New Testament that gives us specific revelations about his future doom. The New Testament tells us about his present relationship as ruler of the spiritual world of evil. It specifically shows his Antichrist activity. Right. It also reveals his judgment and doom, the fact that Christ has destroyed him. Now that leads us to the next question. Has Satan been judged, and when? Has he been judged? What are the passages of Scripture that focus on Satan's judgment? Let's face it. If you're going to answer questions, you should be able to think of scriptures.
He has been the judge. The sentences in the past. It just hasn't been
I don't believe you.
Genesis 3.
That's the first prophecy that he would be judged.
The sentences in the past. It's even more than that. I haven't gotten that before.
The Lord is probably going to curse you someday with holding the Bible without a concordance. So you better learn it now.
I got a $5,000 computer system with it in 200,000 cross references.
Your brain's got more than that.
Yeah, no, but I don't know how to use the brain. Not figuring out the computer system. No, 50 million bytes. I know that.
Whatever is up there, I've got a bug in my system and it's biting the bytes.
I answered all these other ones out in accordance now. But I do know that somebody was talking about, I do know that the Lord, in relation to the Lord's death, that they said Satan is judged. And I'm not sure it was Paul's writing now. I can't just, Paul's got something writing here.
Yeah, he does. You got 13 or 14 books to choose from. Start with one that has a C at the beginning. Hint number 1. Hint number 2, it's got an O in it. Where does it say that by dying on the cross that Christ made an open show of the spirit world that opposed God? Oh, that's a major verse. 2:15.
Just about there. I was on the page before.
What book is that? See, it's describing the death of Christ in verses 11 and 12. Death, burial, and resurrection. Buried with him in baptism, risen with him through faith in the operation of God, who raised him from the dead. He has made us alive together with Christ, forgiven us all trespasses, blotting out the handwriting of ordinances against us, took it out of the way, nailing it to his cross. Verse 15, and having spoiled principalities and powers, he made a show of them openly, triumphing over them in it. So Paul is laying down, he doesn't actually mention Satan there, but he mentions principalities and powers. The implication is that the whole angelic realm was judged. That is, the Antichrist angelic realm was spoiled by Christ on the cross. But there is a more specific reference. That's a general one. This was a past event. At the cross, Christ spoiled principalities and powers. And that's why today you can be very, very thankful that if you are opposed in some specific way by demons, that all you have to do is depend upon the power of Christ. Read it. Revelation 20, 1-3.
I saw an angel come down from heaven, having the key of the bottomless pit and a great chain in his hand. And he laid hold on the dragon, that old serpent who is the devil and Satan, and bound him 1,000 years.
Yeah.
And cast him into the bottomless pit, and shut him up, and set the seal of it upon him, that he should not see the nations no more till 1,000 years should be fulfilled, and after that he was used to see him.
Has that happened?
No.
What specific event is that? What about it? Okay, so the binding of Satan for 1,000 years in the pit. Okay, so that's a future event. Will be bound and cast into the pit for 1,000 years. For 1,000 years. Okay, that's a future event. Let's look at another one. Tracy. Yeah, we're just about done. Yeah.
No.
You give us 5 minutes? Yeah. Okay, so
22.
which says?
And the devil that deceived them was cast into the fire and brimstone, and the beast and the false prophet are and shall be tormented day and night forever.
So, not only cast into the pit, but that's going to be followed by a casting into hell, which was prepared for him and his angels. Okay, well, I'm going to have to give it to you. Hebrews chapter 2, verses 14 and 15. John, come on, you got to memorize these references. John 12. Just get the chapters if you can't remember the verses. John 12, Hebrews 2, Revelation 20, Colossians 2. Man, that's easy to remember.
John 12, what?
Only down to 350.
Well, I think it's about verse 38 or 41. How's that for a guess? Let's try it.
John.
Well, a little out. Jesus was just about ready to go to the cross, and he was predicting this event, and the people heard him, heard thunder, verse 29, and Jesus said, this voice, verse 30, came not because of me, but for your sakes. Now is the judgment of this world. Now shall the prince of this world be cast out. And if I be lifted up from the earth, will draw all men to me. And so Christ associated the lifting up on the cross with the judgment of the world and of the prince of this world. Now, has the world actually been judged? Like, have we gone through the judgments that Satan apparently is still free to roam? Some people think he's on a long chain. But the point is that the judgment, like anybody that knows anything about our legal system and our judicial system and our penal system knows that there is a process to judgment. Like judgment is a general thing. What's the first stage of judgment? Right? So a charge is laid, and then evidence is given. Court session, right? And if there's evidence, results in a sentence. Now the guy's still standing in court.
Yeah, I mean, he can. One can appeal in heaven, but around here he gets appealed and everything else.
Right?
And then the sentence is carried out.
Right. And then you have the execution of the sentence. So the passing of sentence and the executing of sentence are two different things. And that is the whole point. That some of these things that you're talking about, John 12, Jesus said, when I go on the cross, the devil is going to be judged. And so is the world. That is the grounds. That is the passing of sentence.
How about Luke 10:18?
So in one sense, just before we do that, in one sense, when Christ died on the cross, judgment was passed. But it's still going to be executed in the future. Okay? That other reference?
Luke 10:18. And he said unto them, I beheld Satan as lightning fall from heaven. This is when 70 returned.
Okay.
There was sent out anyway. And he said, behold, I give unto you power to tread on serpents and scorpions and all the power of the enemy, and nothing shall by any means hurt you. But he said, I beheld Satan as lightning fall from heaven.
Now, it's almost impossible to say what that was. You know, was Christ envisioning this future execution of judgment? Or was it a temporary thing that he bound Satan himself by his own power so that those disciples of his could work in a special way? Or what?
Or could it be saying that he's been kicked out of his position and where he had authority at one time and had beheld him removed?
Maybe it's referring to his, when he was kicked out of heaven. So there's no way to say for sure what that past event was, what that references. But Hebrews 2 is a significant event because this is the fulfillment of the one you mentioned, Blair, Genesis 3:15, that the seed of the woman would destroy the devil and the devil's seed. Okay? The woman's seed, reference to Christ, would receive would be bruised. That's the word that's used. You will bruise his heel, Satan. That's what you'll be able to do. But he will bruise your head. So it would be, the devil would receive a mortal wound, whereas Christ would be temporarily, hurt a lesser way. Well, read Hebrews 2:14 and 15. You actually have the same terminology there. Isaiah 53 says he was bruised for our iniquities. Hebrews 2:14 and 15.
You want to read it loud?
Yes.
For as much then as the children are partakers of flesh and blood, he also himself likewise took